5,000 years ago, long before electricity, computers, engines, or modern machines, something extraordinary was happening in the shadow of Giza. A civilization with copper tools, wooden sleds, and astonishing mathematical knowledge was moving stones weighing tons, creating structures aligned with incredible precision, and developing technologies that still leave archaeologists searching for answers. But what if the most important discovery isn't the Great Pyramid itself? What if something found near Giza reveals that ancient Egyptians understood technology in a way we have never fully appreciated? Hidden among the ruins of one of humanity's greatest civilizations are strange artifacts, mechanical devices, advanced water systems, astronomical instruments, and engineering techniques that seem almost impossible for their age. And then there is the question that refuses to disappear. How did they actually do it? Were the pyramids simply the result of generations of brilliant engineering and organization? Or have we misunderstood what ancient Egyptian technology was capable of? Tonight, we are going back 5,000 years to investigate the discoveries, theories, and mysteries surrounding one of the most extraordinary civilizations ever known. Because the deeper we look into ancient Egypt, the stranger the story becomes. For thousands of years, the sands of Egypt have guarded a secret that refuses to disappear. Beneath the blazing sun, beyond the silent eyes of the Sphinx and the enormous walls of the Great Pyramid, archaeologists have uncovered objects that seem almost impossible for their age. Not because they were made of gold, not because they belonged to a forgotten king, but because some of them appear to reveal something far more unsettling. The people who built ancient Egypt's greatest monuments understood technology, engineering, mathematics, astronomy, and natural forces with a sophistication that still surprises us today. Imagine standing near Giza more than 4,500 years ago. There are no engines roaring across the desert, no steel cranes, no concrete mixers, no computers calculating angles. There is only stone, wood, copper, rope, water, sunlight, and thousands of human hands. Yet in front of you, an enormous pyramid is rising toward the sky. Millions of blocks are being positioned with astonishing precision. Its sides are aligned with the cardinal directions. Its polished limestone surface reflects the sunlight like a gigantic mirror. And somewhere beneath your feet, hidden inside the ancient landscape, are technologies and engineering solutions that may tell us how this civilization accomplished what still looks impossible. The mystery becomes even stranger when we look beyond the pyramids themselves. At Saqqara, archaeologists discovered a tiny wooden object that looked like a simple bird. It was only a few inches long. For decades, it seemed almost insignificant compared with the enormous monuments surrounding it. Yet later, one researcher proposed that its unusual shape resembled a primitive aircraft. The idea was controversial, and experiments produced conflicting results. There is no accepted evidence that ancient Egyptians actually flew aircraft. But the object raises a fascinating question. How advanced was ancient Egyptian experimentation? And why do so many objects from the ancient world seem to appear just one step ahead of their time? The answer may begin with something much less glamorous than a mysterious machine. It begins with a problem. Ancient Egyptians had to solve enormous practical problems. They needed to move stone weighing several tons. They needed to measure enormous structures across uneven ground. They needed to predict the annual flooding of the Nile. They needed to track the movement of the sun and stars. They needed to preserve food, construct ships, manage water, and build monuments that could survive for thousands of years. Every one of these challenges demanded technology, and some of that technology has survived. At Abydos, archaeologists discovered an extraordinary fleet of ancient wooden boats buried in chambers near the desert. These were not tiny models placed inside a tomb. They were full-sized vessels, built thousands of years ago, carefully positioned beside one another. Their construction revealed sophisticated knowledge of woodworking and shipbuilding at a time when the pyramids of Giza had not yet been built. The boats also reveal something important about ancient Egyptian technology. Innovation does not always look futuristic. Sometimes it looks simple. A wooden sled pulled across wet sand may not seem like advanced engineering, but when that sled is carrying a block weighing more than a ton, controlling friction becomes a technological problem. Experiments have shown that adding water to sand can dramatically reduce the effort required to drag heavy objects. An ancient Egyptian painting even appears to show liquid being poured in front of a sled. Perhaps the greatest technological achievement of ancient Egypt was not one mysterious machine. Perhaps it was the ability to combine hundreds of simple technologies into one enormous system. The Nile was one part of that system. Boats were another. Sledges, ropes, ramps, levers, surveying instruments, skilled workers, quarrying techniques, and mathematics all played their role. And then there was the pyramid itself. The Great Pyramid of Khufu was originally around 481 feet high. It required millions of stone blocks and was constructed with a precision that continues to attract engineers and archaeologists. Its builders had to establish a stable foundation, organize enormous quantities of stone, transport materials over long distances, and raise blocks hundreds of feet above the ground. They accomplished this without modern machinery. That fact alone is extraordinary. But the real mystery begins when we look at the precision. The pyramid's sides are aligned remarkably closely with the four cardinal directions. Its base is enormous, yet the difference between its longest and shortest sides is surprisingly small. The builders somehow transformed rough blocks of stone into an immense geometric structure with a level of organization that demanded careful measurement. So where did that knowledge come from? Ancient Egypt did not suddenly become technologically sophisticated when the Great Pyramid appeared. The pyramid was the result of centuries of experimentation. Before Giza, there was Djoser's Step Pyramid at Saqqara. It was an architectural experiment on a massive scale, transforming the traditional royal tomb into something entirely new. Its stepped layers represented an important stage in the evolution of pyramid construction. Earlier structures had already taught Egyptian builders how to manipulate stone, organize labor, create monumental foundations, and solve structural problems. Generation after generation, they learned. Then came Giza. The Great Pyramid was not an isolated miracle. It was the product of accumulated knowledge. And this is where the story becomes far more interesting. Because ancient Egypt was not alone in developing sophisticated technology. Across the ancient world, other civilizations produced objects that seem startlingly advanced for their time. More than 2,000 years ago, Greek engineers created the Antikythera mechanism, an intricate bronze device capable of modeling astronomical cycles. Its gears were so sophisticated that it has often been described as an ancient analog computer. In ancient Mesopotamia, a mysterious clay vessel known as the Baghdad Battery has been interpreted by some researchers as a possible primitive electrical device, although its actual purpose remains uncertain. In Minoan Crete, complex plumbing systems and early flushing toilets demonstrate that sanitation technology existed thousands of years before modern engineers redesigned it. And in the 1st century, Heron of Alexandria described mechanisms capable of automatically opening temple doors using heat, water, pressure, and weights. None of these discoveries proves that ancient civilizations possessed modern technology. But together, they force us to reconsider an old assumption. Ancient people were not technologically primitive simply because they lacked computers, electricity grids, or modern factories. They were engineers working with the materials and knowledge available to them. And sometimes, They were remarkably good at it. Now return to Giza. The desert is silent. The pyramid stands above you. Millions of stones are locked together in a structure that has survived earthquakes, erosion, political collapse, changing religions, and thousands of years of human history. For centuries, people have asked the same question. How was it built? Some explanations involve enormous ramps. Others suggest different combinations of ramps, sledges, levers, boats, and lifting systems. Archaeological discoveries, including ancient quarry ramps and workers' settlements, provide valuable evidence for how Egyptian construction projects may have operated, but there is still no surviving ancient instruction manual explaining exactly how the Great Pyramid was constructed. That missing blueprint has created a space where speculation thrives. Some theories suggest hidden machines. Others propose forgotten energy systems. Some even claim that the pyramids were designed as enormous power plants. These ideas are fascinating, but fascination is not proof, and that distinction matters. The most compelling mysteries are not the ones that require us to abandon history. They are the ones that emerge directly from the evidence and force us to ask better questions. What did ancient Egyptians know about mathematics? How accurately could they measure the landscape? How did they move enormous stones? How did they organize tens of thousands of workers? What technologies have disappeared because they were made from wood, rope, leather, or other materials that could not survive thousands of years? And most importantly, how much knowledge have we simply lost? Because when we look at the archaeological record, we are not looking at the complete ancient world. We are looking at what survived. Stone survives. Gold survives. Ceramics survive. But wooden machines rot. Ropes disappear. Organic materials decay. Tools are reused. Buildings collapse. Libraries burn. Knowledge passes from one generation to another and can vanish when that chain is broken. The ancient Egyptians may have left behind only fragments of a much larger technological world. And somewhere among those fragments may be the key to understanding how they transformed an empty stretch of desert into one of the greatest architectural landscapes on Earth. The strange object near Giza is only the beginning. Because the deeper archaeologists dig, the more complicated the story becomes. A mysterious artifact points toward an engineering tradition. An ancient boat reveals sophisticated construction. A hidden chamber raises questions about architectural planning. A mathematical measurement hints at knowledge that had to be developed long before the monument itself existed. And beneath all of it stands the Great Pyramid. Silent, massive, patient, waiting for modern science to ask the right question. Perhaps the greatest secret of ancient Egypt was never a lost machine or a forgotten source of supernatural power. Perhaps it was knowledge. Knowledge accumulated slowly, tested through failure, improved across generations, and eventually transformed into monuments that seem impossible only because we have forgotten how much human beings were capable of achieving without modern technology. But there is still one discovery that brings this mystery much closer to the heart of our story. A discovery that may reveal just how inventive ancient Egyptians could be. And when we examine what it was designed to do, we may begin to understand that the greatest technology of ancient Egypt was not necessarily hidden inside the pyramids. It may have been hidden in plain sight. The mystery becomes deeper when we stop looking at the pyramids as impossible monuments and start looking at the civilization that built them. Because the Great Pyramid did not appear out of nowhere. Long before Khufu's monument dominated the Giza Plateau, Egyptian engineers had already spent centuries learning how to turn stone, water, wood, mathematics, and human labor into something far more ambitious than ordinary buildings. The story of Egyptian technology is not a story of one miraculous invention. It is a story of thousands of small discoveries, each one solving a problem that the previous generation had struggled to overcome. And one of the earliest clues can be found at Saqqara. Today, Saqqara is one of Egypt's most important archaeological landscapes. Tombs, temples, mastabas, pyramids, statues, and buried chambers stretch across the desert. But around 4,600 years ago, this landscape became the setting for an architectural experiment that would transform Egyptian history. The experiment belonged to Pharaoh Djoser. His step pyramid was unlike anything that had come before it. Instead of constructing a conventional rectangular tomb, Egyptian builders stacked enormous stone structures into 6 progressively smaller levels. The result rose more than 200 feet above the desert. It was the tallest human-made structure of its time. But the pyramid itself was only one part of the achievement. Around it stood an enormous ceremonial complex containing courtyards, chapels, walls, passageways, and symbolic structures. The entire complex had to be planned as a unified system. Every stone had to be cut, transported, positioned, and fitted into a carefully designed architectural landscape. Someone had to calculate distances. Someone had to organize workers. Someone had to estimate quantities of stone. Someone had to solve drainage and structural problems. And someone had to understand how the monument would look from different points across the desert. The man traditionally associated with this transformation was Imhotep, an official, architect, and priest whose reputation eventually became legendary. Whether every architectural innovation at Saqqara can be personally attributed to Imhotep is impossible to prove. But his association with the step pyramid tells us something important. Egyptians were beginning to think about architecture as engineering. Stone was no longer merely a material for walls. It could become a system. The step pyramid also represents something even more significant. It shows that the Great Pyramid was part of an evolutionary process. The builders did not begin with the most sophisticated pyramid and somehow get everything right on their first attempt. They experimented. They changed designs. They solved structural problems. They learned from failures. And over generations, the shape of the pyramid evolved. That process eventually produced the pyramids of Giza. But there was another technology supporting this transformation, one that is easy to overlook because it does not look spectacular. Mathematics. Ancient Egyptian builders needed mathematics to measure land, calculate dimensions, determine slopes, estimate quantities, and maintain alignment. The annual flooding of the Nile made land measurement particularly important. Each year, water could cover boundaries and alter the landscape. Surveyors therefore needed methods to re-establish property lines and calculate areas. Geometry became practical technology. It was not mathematics for the sake of mathematics. It was mathematics used to control the physical world. And the pyramids became some of the greatest demonstrations of that knowledge. Look at the Great Pyramid from the ground. Its 4 sides rise toward a single apex. The enormous base had to be established on relatively level ground. The corners had to be positioned accurately. The builders needed to maintain consistent angles while the structure grew higher and higher. A tiny error at the base could become a massive error hundreds of feet above it. Yet the final monument remained remarkably symmetrical. How did they accomplish this? One possibility involves astronomical observation. Ancient Egyptians carefully watched the sky. The movements of stars provided a stable reference system that could help surveyors determine direction. The north-south orientation of the Great Pyramid is particularly impressive because its builders achieved it without a magnetic compass. They had to find north using the heavens. That means the night sky was not merely a source of mythology. It was a tool. The stars became instruments of measurement. The sun became a clock. The Nile became a transportation network. And the desert itself became a giant construction site. This is what makes ancient Egyptian technology so fascinating. Their technological world was integrated with nature rather than separated from it. They did not need an engine to move stone if water could carry it. They did not need a modern laser level if astronomical observations and simple surveying tools could establish orientation. They did not need a giant mechanical crane if ramps, sledges, ropes, levers, and thousands of coordinated workers could accomplish the same task. The technology was different. The engineering challenge was the same. And then there is water. Water may have been one of the most important technologies in ancient Egypt. The civilization existed because of the Nile. Its annual flooding replenished agricultural land, supporting a population large enough to build cities, temples, tombs, and pyramids. Egyptians became experts at managing this resource. They developed irrigation systems, channels, reservoirs, and methods of transporting water. Later discoveries have also revealed sophisticated drainage and sanitation systems. Thousands of years before modern plumbing, some wealthy Egyptian households had systems designed to move water through buildings. In other parts of the ancient Mediterranean world, similar innovations appeared. At the Palace of Knossos on Crete, archaeologists discovered evidence of sophisticated water management and an ancient flushing toilet system. The concept may sound surprisingly modern, but the principle was simple. Gravity and controlled water flow could perform tasks that did not require electricity. This is an important lesson. Technology does not have to be complicated to be advanced. Sometimes the most effective engineering solution is a simple one. The Egyptians understood this principle extremely well. Consider the transportation of stone. The quarries around Giza could provide enormous quantities of limestone. But harder stones, such as granite, had to travel much farther. Granite was brought from southern Egypt, transported along the Nile, and then moved from the river toward the construction site. Imagine the scale of that operation. A massive block is cut from a quarry. It is shaped with relatively simple tools. Then it has to be transported across land, then loaded onto a boat, then carried hundreds of miles along the Nile, then unloaded, then dragged toward the pyramid, then raised, then positioned with precision. And this process had to happen again and again, millions of times. The final pyramid is therefore not just a monument. It is the physical result of an enormous logistical system. Every block represents transportation, labor, planning, measurement, and organization. The workers themselves were another part of the technology. For decades, popular culture portrayed pyramid construction as an endless stream of slaves being forced to drag stones under brutal conditions. Archaeological evidence provides a more complicated picture. Excavations near Giza have revealed a large settlement associated with workers, along with evidence of food production, administration, and organized labor. The builders were not simply an uncontrolled crowd. They belonged to a structured workforce. Some were skilled craftsmen. Others transported materials. Others produced food. Others maintained equipment. Others supervised the work. The pyramid required an entire economy to function. And that may be the greatest technological achievement of all. The Egyptians were not simply building a pyramid. They were building the organization necessary to build a pyramid. That distinction changes how we understand the monument. The real technology was distributed across society. It existed in the quarry. It existed on the river. It existed in the workshops. It existed in the mathematics of the surveyors. It existed in the hands of craftsmen. It existed in the knowledge of engineers. And it existed in the administrative system that kept thousands of people supplied. Yet there is still a strange problem. If Egyptian engineers possessed so much practical knowledge, why do we have so few detailed explanations of exactly how the Great Pyramid was constructed? Where are the blueprints? Where are the engineering manuals? Where is the step-by-step instruction describing the ramps, lifting systems, measurements, and construction sequence? The absence of such records has created one of the greatest archaeological mysteries in history. But absence of evidence is not evidence of an impossible technology. Ancient Egypt left behind inscriptions, administrative documents, tomb paintings, tools, quarry sites, worker settlements, and architectural remains. Researchers use these fragments to reconstruct the past. And sometimes, a single discovery can change the entire picture. That is exactly what happened with an ancient Egyptian document discovered far from the pyramid itself. It was not a blueprint for the Great Pyramid. It was something much more ordinary, a record of workers transporting limestone. But its existence revealed something extraordinary about the logistics behind the monument. The document described the movement of stone from a quarry toward Giza and provided a rare glimpse into the organization of the construction process. For the first time, the pyramid began to look less like a mysterious object and more like the endpoint of a huge industrial operation. Yet the mystery did not disappear. It became sharper. Because knowing where the stone came from does not tell us exactly how it was lifted. Knowing that workers used boats does not explain how multi-ton blocks climbed the pyramid. Knowing that ramps existed does not reveal their precise design. And knowing that ancient Egyptians understood geometry does not tell us exactly how they achieved such remarkable alignment. The deeper we look, the more questions appear. And that is where the story of ancient Egyptian technology takes another unexpected turn. Because some of the most controversial theories do not focus on ropes, ramps, or sledges. They focus on something invisible: energy, electricity, electromagnetism, and a 20th century inventor who became fascinated by the possibility that the ancient pyramids were more than tombs. His name was Nikola Tesla. Tesla never proved that the pyramids generated electricity, and mainstream archaeology does not accept the idea that Giza was an ancient power plant. But his fascination with wireless energy created a strange connection between modern electrical experimentation and one of humanity's oldest monuments. And once that connection entered popular culture, a new question emerged. Could the pyramid's unusual shape interact with energy in ways its builders understood? The answer is far more complicated than the legends suggest. And to understand why, we have to leave the desert for a moment and enter the world of electricity, experiments, and one of the strangest theories ever attached to the Great Pyramid. But perhaps the most unsettling part of the story is not what the ancient Egyptians built. It is what they may have understood. For thousands of years, we have looked at the pyramids and imagined a civilization struggling with primitive tools, dragging enormous stones across the desert with little more than ropes, wood, and human strength. Yet the more archaeologists uncover, the harder that picture becomes to accept in its simplest form. Ancient Egypt was not a civilization that suddenly appeared with the ability to construct monuments on an impossible scale. Its technology developed over centuries. Its engineers learned how to measure land, move enormous objects, control water, shape stone, organize thousands of workers, and create machines whose principles still resemble mechanisms used today. And somewhere inside that long-forgotten history lies a question that refuses to disappear. What if the most important Egyptian technology was never designed to look like a machine? Near the Giza Plateau, archaeologists have discovered evidence of sophisticated engineering systems that reveal something remarkable about the people who built the monuments. Their greatest achievement may not have been the pyramid itself. It may have been the system behind it. Imagine standing beside the Great Pyramid more than 4,500 years ago. There are no cranes, no engines, no steel cables, no modern roads. And yet, in front of you, stands a structure made from millions of stone blocks, some weighing several tons. Every block has to be quarried, shaped, transported, positioned, and aligned. The entire project depends on thousands of separate actions happening at exactly the right time. One mistake could damage an entire section. One poorly positioned block could affect everything above it. And somehow the Egyptians repeatedly solved these problems. That means the real technological achievement may have been hidden in the ordinary objects surrounding the pyramids. Wooden sledges, copper tools, ropes, levers, boats, ramps, water channels, measuring instruments. None of these objects looks futuristic. But together, they formed an extraordinary engineering system. One of the biggest clues comes from the Nile. The pyramids were not built in an isolated desert. Ancient Giza was connected to a landscape of waterways, harbors, quarries, settlements, and agricultural land. Heavy materials could be moved by boat during periods when the Nile and its channels provided access close to the construction zone. That changes the picture completely. Instead of imagining workers dragging every enormous block across kilometers of sand, we can imagine a sophisticated transportation network moving materials by water, followed by carefully organized land transport. And the Egyptians understood something surprisingly simple but extremely powerful. Water could make heavy loads easier to move. Experiments with ancient-style sledges have shown that dampening sand in front of a sled can significantly reduce the force required to pull it. It sounds almost too simple. But sometimes the greatest engineering breakthroughs are not complicated machines. They are simple ideas applied at enormous scale. Thousands of workers pulling together. Ropes carefully positioned. Sledges moving across prepared surfaces. And supervisors coordinating every stage. This could explain how enormous stones reached the pyramid. But it still leaves the most difficult question. How did they get them higher? For decades, researchers have proposed different ramp systems. A straight ramp, a zigzagging ramp, a ramp wrapping around the pyramid, a combination of ramps, platforms, levers, and sledges. There is no universally accepted reconstruction of the entire process, and that uncertainty has created fertile ground for speculation. Some theories claim that the Egyptians possessed technologies we have completely lost. Others suggest that the pyramids were somehow connected to electricity, sound, resonance, or even unknown forms of energy. But there is a crucial distinction between an intriguing possibility and archaeological evidence. The mystery becomes more interesting when we separate what we know from what we merely imagine. And this is where another strange object enters the story. The so-called Saqqara bird. Discovered in a tomb at Saqqara and dating to ancient Egypt, the small wooden object has a bird-like shape. Some modern enthusiasts have argued that its design resembles an airplane or even an advanced flying machine. At first glance, the comparison is astonishing. A tiny wooden aircraft supposedly created thousands of years before powered flight. But archaeology demands something more than resemblance. There is no clear evidence that the object was intended to fly. It may have been a symbolic representation of a bird, perhaps connected to religious beliefs about the soul and the afterlife. And yet the object still raises an interesting question. How did ancient craftsmen understand shape, balance, movement, and aerodynamics well enough to produce something that modern eyes find strangely familiar? Maybe the answer is not lost technology. Maybe it is simply observation. Ancient people watched birds. They watched boats. They watched water. They watched shadows move. They watched the stars. They watched the behavior of materials. And they turned those observations into practical knowledge. This same principle appears in another ancient marvel, one that seems completely unrelated to the pyramids. The Antikythera mechanism. Created more than 2,000 years ago in the ancient Greek world, this extraordinary device used interlocking gears to model astronomical cycles. It could track celestial movements and predict phenomena with a complexity that shocked modern researchers. It was not Egyptian. It was not found near Giza. But it proves something extremely important. Ancient civilizations were capable of developing mechanical systems far more sophisticated than the popular image of the ancient world suggests. And that changes how we look at Egypt. Perhaps the question should not be, how could primitive people build something so advanced? Perhaps the better question is, how advanced were these people actually? Because ancient Egypt was filled with technologies that were designed to solve very practical problems. Consider water. A civilization cannot survive for thousands of years beside a great river without learning how to control it. Egyptian engineers developed systems for lifting, transporting, storing, and distributing water. Later devices such as the shaduf used a counterbalanced beam to raise water from the Nile or irrigation channels. The principle is incredibly simple. A long wooden beam, a container, a pivot, a counterweight, and suddenly one person can accomplish work that would otherwise require far more effort. Again, there is no mysterious energy source, no lost machine, just an elegant understanding of physics. And that may be the real secret behind Egyptian engineering. They understood leverage, they understood balance, they understood gravity, they understood geometry, they understood materials, and perhaps most importantly, they understood organization. The Great Pyramid was not simply a pile of stones. It was a project involving quarry workers, craftsmen, boat crews, engineers, surveyors, food suppliers, administrators, and thousands of laborers. Every part of the system had to function. Food had to arrive. Tools had to be maintained. Stone had to be delivered. Workers had to be housed. Measurements had to be repeated. And the construction had to continue for years. That is technology too. We often define technology as a machine, but a machine is only one form of technology. A complex organization capable of coordinating thousands of people toward one enormous objective is itself a technological achievement, and the Egyptians appear to have mastered it. Yet there is still something deeply strange about the precision of the pyramids. The Great Pyramid is aligned remarkably closely with the cardinal directions. Its builders achieved this without magnetic compasses or satellites. They relied on observations of the sky. The stars became their reference points. The sun became their clock. The shadows became their measuring tools. The landscape became their laboratory. And the pyramid became the final result. Perhaps that is why the monument still feels almost unnatural when you stand beneath it. It does not look like an experiment. It looks like the finished product of knowledge we are only beginning to understand. And that brings us back to the mysterious claim of a 5,000-year-old Egyptian technology found near Giza. The temptation is to imagine a secret machine buried beneath the sand, a device capable of producing electricity, a forgotten generator, a machine that could explain everything. But the evidence does not require such a dramatic answer. The real discovery may be more fascinating, because the closer we look at ancient Egypt, the more we find evidence of a civilization that understood engineering as a complete system. They did not need computers to solve enormous problems. They needed mathematics, observation, experience, materials, manpower, and time. What remains mysterious is not whether they were capable of extraordinary engineering. They clearly were. The mystery is how much of their knowledge has disappeared. How many techniques were never written down? How many experiments were forgotten? How many tools have rotted away? How many construction methods vanished when the people who understood them died? And how many secrets are still buried beneath the Egyptian desert? Because beneath Giza, beneath Saqqara, beneath the temples and ruined settlements, there may still be evidence waiting to be found. Not evidence of aliens, not evidence of impossible machines. Something potentially more unsettling. Evidence of what human beings were capable of thousands of years ago. And if archaeologists continue digging, scanning, and analyzing these ancient sites, we may eventually discover that the greatest Egyptian technology was never a single mysterious device. It was an entire system of knowledge. A system so effective that its greatest monument is still standing today. After earthquakes, after wars, after dynasties disappeared, after languages changed, after entire civilizations vanished. the Great Pyramid remains. And perhaps the greatest mystery is not how it survived. It is how much its builders knew before they disappeared into history. But if the technology behind the pyramids was really a system of knowledge, then there is another question we have to ask. Where did that knowledge come from? The Great Pyramid did not appear out of nowhere. Long before Giza became the center of Egyptian civilization, engineers were already experimenting with monumental architecture, stone cutting, geometry, transportation, and water management. The pyramid itself was the result of generations of trial and error. And that may be one of the most important clues to the entire mystery. Because when we look closely at the history of Egyptian pyramids, we don't see a civilization suddenly discovering a perfect construction technique. We see experiments. We see failures. We see strange designs. And we see builders learning from their mistakes. One of the most fascinating examples is the Bent Pyramid at Dashur. At first glance, it looks almost like two different pyramids were combined into one. The lower section rises at a steep angle, but partway up, the angle suddenly changes and becomes much shallower. Why? For centuries, researchers have debated what happened. The simplest explanation is also one of the most revealing. The builders may have realized that the original angle was creating structural problems. If they continued upward at the same steep angle, the weight of the upper layers could put enormous pressure on the lower structure. Cracks could develop. The monument could become unstable. So they changed the design. Imagine being an ancient engineer standing beneath thousands of tons of stone, realizing that your mathematical assumptions might be wrong. There is no computer simulation, no structural engineering software, no modern instruments. The only thing you have is observation and experience. So the pyramid changes shape. The result may look strange to us, but it could represent something incredibly important. A lesson. The Egyptians were learning. And eventually, those lessons contributed to the development of the smooth-sided pyramids we associate with Giza. That means the Great Pyramid may not be an inexplicable miracle. It may be the final result of hundreds of years of engineering experimentation. But that does not make it less impressive. In some ways, it makes it even more extraordinary. Because the builders were not simply following instructions left behind by some mysterious advanced civilization. They were solving problems, again and again. And sometimes, they solved problems that modern engineers still find fascinating. Take the enormous granite blocks used inside the Great Pyramid. Some came from quarries hundreds of kilometers away. Granite is extremely hard compared with limestone, and working it with copper tools was not easy. So, how did ancient craftsmen shape it? One important clue comes from the tools themselves. Copper chisels and other implements were used, but copper alone is relatively soft. That means the Egyptians likely relied heavily on abrasive materials. Hard stones could be used to pound and shape softer rock, while abrasive sand could help wear surfaces down. It was slow, painfully slow. But slow does not mean impossible. Give a skilled worker enough time, enough tools, and enough people, and small amounts of work become enormous achievements. A single worker does not need to carve an entire monument. Thousands of workers each need to complete one small task, then another, and another. Over decades, those small tasks become a pyramid. This is one reason the ancient construction process can be difficult for modern people to imagine. We tend to think about technology in terms of speed. Ancient builders thought in terms of persistence. They did not need to finish the pyramid next month. They could spend decades building it. A civilization that can maintain the same project for 20 years while constantly supplying food, tools, stone, timber, rope, and labor has solved a problem that is just as difficult as moving a giant block. It has created an industrial system without modern industry. And there is evidence that this workforce was far more organized than the old image of slaves being whipped through the desert. Archaeologists discovered settlements near Giza containing evidence of large-scale food production and worker housing. Animal bones, bread production areas, storage facilities, and other remains suggest that the workers were supplied on an impressive scale. These people were not simply wandering around the construction site. They belonged to a system. Someone had to calculate how much grain was needed. Someone had to transport it. Someone had to prepare it. Someone had to organize the workers. Someone had to keep records. Someone had to manage the tools. Someone had to coordinate the quarrying. And somewhere above all of them was an administrative structure capable of keeping the entire operation alive. That is technology. Invisible technology. The technology of organization. But there is another element that makes ancient Egypt even more fascinating. Measurement. The Egyptians had to create remarkably accurate horizontal and vertical surfaces. The base of the Great Pyramid is enormous, yet its builders managed to create a structure with extraordinary alignment. How? One possibility involves water. Water naturally settles into a level surface. That simple physical property can become a powerful surveying tool. Imagine creating a network of trenches or channels filled with water around a construction area. If the water level is consistent, it can help identify variations in elevation. No laser level is required. No satellite. Just gravity. The same force that makes construction difficult can also become a tool for measuring it. And this is perhaps the recurring theme of Egyptian engineering. They did not defeat nature. They learned how to use it. The Nile was not merely a river. It was a transportation system. The desert was not merely an obstacle. It helped preserve artifacts for thousands of years. The sun was not simply a source of heat. It became a clock. The stars were not merely points of light. They became reference markers. Gravity was not just the force pulling stones downward. It could be used to create levels, balance mechanisms, and control movement. Water was not simply something to drink. It became a tool. This way of thinking helps explain another strange category of ancient Egyptian technology: plumbing. Today, plumbing seems ordinary. You turn a tap, water comes out, you flush a toilet, waste disappears. But controlling water inside a large settlement is a serious engineering challenge. Ancient Egyptian sites contain evidence of drainage systems, channels, basins, and carefully designed water management structures. Some systems were built for practical purposes. Others had religious functions. And some appear to have been connected to the movement of water through temples and ritual spaces. This matters because it demonstrates that ancient engineering was not limited to giant monuments. It existed at the level of everyday life. A civilization capable of building a pyramid also had to solve ordinary problems. How do you store water? How do you move it? How do you drain it? How do you keep buildings functioning? How do you transport food? How do you preserve materials? These small technologies are easy to overlook because they are not visually spectacular, but they reveal how sophisticated a society really was. And then there are the technologies we can barely see at all: medicine, chemistry, preservation, mummification. The Egyptians developed complex methods for preserving human remains. They understood that removing moisture was critical. They used salts and resins. They wrapped bodies in layers of linen. They treated different parts of the body in carefully controlled ways. Whatever we think about the religious beliefs behind mummification, the process itself required considerable practical knowledge. It was chemistry mixed with craftsmanship. And the same civilization that developed those techniques was also creating pigments, adhesives, glass, metal objects, perfumes, cosmetics, and specialized materials. This was not a primitive society. It was a civilization experimenting constantly with the properties of the world around it. And perhaps that is why modern discoveries continue to surprise us. Every excavation can reveal another piece of the puzzle. A workshop, a tool, a hidden chamber, a strange mechanical object, a forgotten inscription, a buried settlement. Sometimes the discovery completely changes our understanding. Sometimes it simply confirms what researchers already suspected. And sometimes it creates a new mystery. Near Giza, modern technology has now allowed researchers to investigate places that ancient explorers could never have imagined studying without entering them. Moon scanning, for example, can detect changes in density inside enormous stone structures. It works by studying particles that naturally pass through Earth's atmosphere. These particles can travel through massive amounts of stone. By measuring how many reach detectors placed around a structure, scientists can identify areas where the density is different. In other words, researchers can search inside the pyramid without removing every block. And this has revealed something astonishing. The Great Pyramid contains previously unknown spaces, not necessarily secret treasure rooms, not necessarily chambers filled with ancient machines, but spaces that were not known from conventional exploration. That alone changes the story. Because the pyramid is still giving us information after more than 4,000 years. And perhaps the most unsettling possibility is that we have only scratched the surface. What if more hidden spaces exist? What if ancient construction techniques are still buried beneath the foundations? What if an ordinary-looking object eventually reveals a forgotten engineering principle? And what if the technology we are searching for was never a spectacular machine at all? What if it was something as simple as a tool, a measuring device, a water system, or a mechanism that disappeared because it was made from materials that could not survive thousands of years? That possibility is far more realistic, and perhaps far more exciting. Because history is not only about discovering impossible things. It is about realizing that the people who lived thousands of years ago were capable of extraordinary things with the materials available to them. The mystery of Giza may therefore be much deeper than the question of who built the pyramids. We already know the civilization responsible. The real mystery is how far their practical knowledge extended. How many techniques have vanished? How many inventions were never recorded? And how many ancient technologies are still waiting beneath the sands for someone to recognize what they really were? The answer may be buried only a few meters below our feet. And the next discovery could force us to look at the ancient world completely differently. For thousands of years, the Great Pyramid has been treated as a monument. But what if that description is incomplete? What if the pyramid was not simply a tomb, but the center of a much larger technological landscape? Around Giza, archaeologists have found quarries, workers' settlements, boat pits, causeways, temples, storage areas, and enormous quantities of tools and materials. Together, these remains reveal something that is easy to miss when we focus only on the pyramid itself. Giza was not just a construction site. It was a machine made of people, stone, water, mathematics, transportation, and time. And perhaps the strangest part is that most of this machine has disappeared. The pyramid survived because stone survives. The ropes, wooden sledges, boats, scaffolding, temporary ramps, measuring tools, and countless other objects that made construction possible were far more vulnerable. Wood rots. Rope disappears. Leather decays. Organic materials are destroyed. Temporary structures are dismantled and reused. After thousands of years, the monument remains, while the technology that created it slowly vanishes. This may be one reason the pyramid looks so mysterious today. We are staring at the final product without seeing the workshop that produced it. Imagine trying to understand a modern skyscraper thousands of years from now. You might find the concrete foundations. You might find pieces of steel. You might find fragments of glass. But the cranes would be gone. The trucks would be gone. The construction schedules would be gone. The computers would be gone. The workers would be gone. you would see the building and ask the same question. How did they build this? That is essentially the position we find ourselves in with Giza. Except the gap is not a few centuries. It is more than 4 millennia. And there is another problem. The Egyptians did not leave us a complete construction manual. There is no ancient document saying, "Here is exactly how we built the Great Pyramid." Instead, archaeologists have to reconstruct the process from scattered evidence. A piece of papyrus, a quarry, a workers' settlement, a tool, a boat, a ramp, a mark left by a crew. Each discovery is like finding one page from a book whose final chapters have been lost. One of the most valuable clues came from an ancient papyrus discovered near the Red Sea. It belonged to a man named Merer, an official involved in transporting limestone during the reign of Pharaoh Khufu. His records describe crews moving materials by boat. This is important because it gives us something rare, a direct ancient record connected to the enormous construction economy of Khufu's reign. The pyramid was not being built by magic. It was being supplied by a logistics network. Stone was moving. Workers were moving. Food was moving. Everything had to arrive at the right place. And this reveals a side of pyramid construction that is rarely shown in documentaries. The pyramid was a massive supply chain problem. Think about feeding tens of thousands of people every day for years. Those workers need grain. They need water. They need meat. They need tools. They need clothing. They need shelter. They need medical care. And the animals involved in transportation and food production also need to be supplied. The entire system depends on agriculture. Fortunately for Egypt, the Nile made large-scale food production possible. The annual flooding deposited fertile soil across the valley. Farmers could produce enormous quantities of grain. The state could collect part of that agricultural surplus and redirect it toward major projects. In this sense, the pyramid was powered by food. Not electricity, not mysterious crystals, not an unknown energy field. Food. Human beings convert calories into physical work. The state converted agricultural surplus into organized labor. And organized labor converted stone into monuments. It is an incredibly powerful system. But it still does not explain every detail. One of the biggest questions remains the movement of the stones. Some blocks weighed only a few tons. Others were much heavier. Inside the Great Pyramid, enormous granite blocks were transported from the distant region of Aswan. That journey alone required planning. The Nile became the highway. Boats could carry enormous loads that would have been extremely difficult to move over land. During favorable water levels, stone could travel north toward the construction zone. Then the material had to be unloaded and moved across land. This is where sledges become important. Ancient Egyptian artwork shows workers pulling large objects on sledges. One famous image even appears to show a person pouring liquid in front of a sledge. For a long time, this detail seemed almost meaningless. Then scientists tested the physics. Adding the right amount of water to sand can make it significantly more compact and easier for a sled to move across. Too little water does almost nothing. Too much creates mud. But the correct amount can dramatically reduce resistance. The Egyptians may have discovered this through observation long before anyone could describe the physics mathematically. And once again, a simple natural property becomes a technological advantage. But transportation was only half the battle. The stones still had to rise. This is where ramps enter the story. We know ramps existed in ancient Egyptian construction. Archaeologists have discovered ramp systems associated with ancient quarries and building projects. One particularly important example comes from the quarry of Hatnub, where researchers found a steep ramp system dating to roughly the same general period as the construction of the Great Pyramid. The ramp includes stairways and post holes. Researchers believe ropes could have been attached to wooden posts, allowing workers to pull heavy blocks up steep slopes. This is significant because it demonstrates that ancient Egyptians had methods for moving extremely heavy stone up steep inclines. But does it prove exactly how the Great Pyramid was built? No, and that distinction matters. The ramp at Hatnub was not the Great Pyramid. It gives us evidence of what Egyptian engineers could do. It does not provide a complete blueprint for Giza. The Great Pyramid was far larger and more complicated, so researchers continue to debate the precise arrangement of ramps. Perhaps ramps extended directly toward the pyramid. Perhaps they zigzagged. Perhaps they wrapped around sections of the structure. Perhaps multiple systems were used at different stages. The answer may not be one single method. The Egyptians could have changed their strategy as the pyramid grew. At the lower levels, enormous ramps might have been practical. Higher up, smaller ramps, levers, sledges, and temporary platforms may have been more efficient. That would make sense. The pyramid itself changed as it rose, so the construction system may have changed with it. And this leads to one of the most fascinating ideas in ancient engineering. The builders may have been improvising. Not improvising in the sense of randomly guessing, but adapting, testing, correcting, learning. Every generation of Egyptian builders inherited knowledge from the previous generation. The step pyramid of Djoser came first. Then other experiments followed. The bent pyramid revealed structural problems. The red pyramid demonstrated improvements. And eventually, the builders at Giza produced monuments of extraordinary scale and precision. Seen this way, the Great Pyramid becomes less like a sudden miracle and more like the culmination of a technological evolution, because the story of ancient Egypt has attracted some extraordinary claims. Some people argue that the pyramids were power plants. Others believe the Egyptians possessed advanced electrical technology thousands of years before modern civilization. Some even suggest that mysterious objects found in Egypt could be evidence of technology far beyond what historians believe was possible. But what does the evidence actually tell us? One of the most fascinating objects connected to this debate is a small wooden artifact commonly called the Saqqara bird. It was discovered in a tomb at Saqqara and dates to around the 2nd century BCE, although some claims have attempted to connect it with much earlier technology. At first glance, it looks like a simple bird. But when you examine its shape, something strange becomes apparent. It has wings. It has a vertical tail. And its proportions resemble, at least superficially, the shape of an aircraft. That resemblance has inspired an enormous amount of speculation. Could ancient Egyptians have understood aerodynamics? Was this a model of a flying machine? Or was it simply a representation of a bird? Mainstream archaeology generally treats the object as a stylized bird or possibly a model whose original function remains uncertain. And there is an important reason for caution. A shape resembling a modern machine does not automatically prove that the ancient people who created it understood the technology behind that machine. A child can draw a rocket without knowing how a rocket engine works. A wooden bird can accidentally resemble an airplane without being an airplane. But the object remains fascinating because it raises a broader question. How much did ancient people understand about forces we associate with modern science? The Egyptians clearly understood motion, balance, weight, leverage, and geometry. They built boats capable of navigating the Nile and the Mediterranean. They developed sophisticated architectural techniques. They understood practical mathematics well enough to measure land, calculate areas, and construct enormous monuments. They also developed medical procedures, surgical instruments, calendars, astronomical observations, and complex systems of writing. So perhaps the real mystery is not whether they secretly possessed modern technology. Perhaps it is how far their practical knowledge actually extended. And Egypt was not alone. Across the ancient world, civilizations were creating machines that seem almost impossible for their time. One of the most famous examples comes from the Mediterranean, the Antikythera mechanism. Unlike the pyramids, this object is not mysterious because it is enormous. It is mysterious because it is tiny. It is a mechanical device made from bronze gears, discovered inside a shipwreck near the Greek island of Antikythera. Researchers believe it dates to around the 2nd or 1st century BCE. When scientists reconstructed the surviving fragments, they discovered something extraordinary. The mechanism could model astronomical cycles. It appears to have been designed to track movements of celestial bodies and predict astronomical events. This was not a simple decoration. It was a complex mechanical calculator. Its existence forced historians to reconsider what ancient engineers were capable of. For a long time, the history of mechanical technology was imagined as a gradual progression. Simple tools, then more complicated machines, then clocks, then mechanical calculators, then modern computers. But the Antikythera mechanism disrupted that neat timeline. It showed that ancient craftsmen could create highly sophisticated gear systems long before the industrial age. And that matters when we return to Egypt, because ancient civilizations did not exist in isolation. Ideas traveled, engineers traveled, merchants traveled, mathematicians traveled, religious traditions traveled, and technologies could move across borders for centuries. Egypt had contact with Greece, the Levant, Mesopotamia, Nubia, and regions across the Mediterranean. Put all of these together, and the pyramids begin to look less like impossible objects and more like the ultimate expression of a highly organized, technological civilization. But there is still one question that refuses to disappear. Why were the pyramids aligned so precisely? The Great Pyramid is remarkably aligned with the cardinal directions. Its builders had to establish north, south, east, and west with extraordinary accuracy. They did not have a magnetic compass, but they did have something else: the sky. Ancient Egyptians carefully observed celestial objects. Stars could provide fixed reference points, while the movement of the sun could help establish direction and time. This connection between astronomy and architecture was not accidental. Egyptian civilization was deeply connected to the cycles of the heavens, the rising and setting of the sun, the movement of stars, the annual flooding of the Nile, the changing seasons. Life, death, agriculture, religion, and architecture were all connected. The pyramid therefore existed at the intersection of several technologies: engineering, astronomy, mathematics, transportation, stoneworking, water management, and administration. This is why the idea of a single mysterious machine may actually distract us from the more remarkable truth. The technology may have been the civilization itself, but that does not mean every mystery has been solved. Far from it. Modern scanning technologies continue to reveal spaces inside and around ancient monuments that were previously unknown or poorly understood. Muon scanning has allowed researchers to detect differences in density inside the Great Pyramid without physically destroying the structure. Ground-penetrating radar and other remote sensing methods have revealed anomalies beneath archaeological sites. Three-dimensional mapping can expose features buried beneath layers of sand. And every new technique creates the possibility of discovering something the ancient builders never intended us to see. That is where the story becomes genuinely mysterious. Because when modern technology looks into a monument built thousands of years ago, it is not simply searching for treasure. It is searching for information. A hidden chamber could reveal architectural plans. A sealed passage could reveal religious practices. A forgotten workshop could reveal manufacturing techniques. A discarded tool could reveal how a difficult material was shaped. Even something as ordinary as a piece of rope, a wooden fragment, or a damaged stone can completely change what we understand about ancient engineering. And perhaps, somewhere beneath the sands surrounding Giza, another piece of that puzzle is still waiting. Not an alien machine, not a magical energy device, but something potentially more fascinating. Evidence showing exactly how human beings, using knowledge accumulated over generations, achieved something that still looks almost impossible thousands of years later. The real mystery of ancient Egypt may not be that they possessed technology we cannot explain. It may be that they possessed technology we have underestimated. And if that is true, then the next discovery near Giza may not rewrite history by proving that the Egyptians had futuristic machines. It could rewrite history by showing us just how sophisticated human engineering had already become 5,000 years ago. Because sometimes the most shocking discoveries are not evidence that history was wrong. They are evidence that history was far more advanced than we imagined. For thousands of years, the sands of Egypt have hidden more than tombs. Beneath the monuments, inside abandoned chambers, and scattered across forgotten settlements are clues to a civilization that understood engineering in ways that still surprise us. And now, as researchers use technologies that the ancient Egyptians could never have imagined, some of those buried clues are beginning to emerge. But there is one problem. The more we discover, the harder it becomes to separate genuine ancient technology from modern myths. That distinction matters. They watched shadows change. They watched the Nile rise and fall. And they built their technology around these observations. That is how engineering begins. Not with futuristic machines, with curiosity. And ancient Egypt was a civilization obsessed with understanding the world around it. Nowhere is this more obvious than in astronomy. The pyramids were carefully aligned. Temples were oriented according to celestial and solar patterns. Calendars were essential for agriculture and religious ceremonies. The movement of stars could help establish direction. The movement of the sun could establish time. And the annual flooding of the Nile could determine the agricultural cycle. This created a civilization whose survival depended on measurement. If you misunderstand the river, crops can fail. If you misunderstand the calendar, agricultural planning becomes difficult. If you misunderstand the seasons, religious ceremonies and state administration are disrupted. So astronomy was not simply about looking at the stars. It was practical technology. The ancient Egyptians were turning the sky into a measurement system. And that leads us back to Giza. The Great Pyramid's orientation is one of its most remarkable characteristics. Its sides face the cardinal directions with extraordinary accuracy. Yet there was no magnetic compass. The builders had to establish north, south, east, and west using observations of the natural world. One possible method involved stars circling the celestial pole. By observing the movement of certain stars, ancient surveyors could estimate true north. Another possibility involved the sun and shadows. The exact method remains debated, but the result is undeniable. The builders achieved remarkable alignment. And once you understand that, the pyramid begins to look less like an enormous tomb and more like a monument created by people who were deeply comfortable with mathematics and measurement. But perhaps the most surprising Egyptian technology was not in the sky. It was underground. Ancient Egypt was filled with subterranean chambers, tunnels, shafts, wells, drainage systems, and hidden spaces. Some were designed for religious purposes. Some were connected to burial. Others had practical functions. And some remain unexplained. This underground world reveals another side of Egyptian engineering. Building underground is difficult. You need to understand the stability of rock. You need to control water. You need ventilation. You need lighting. You need a plan. And if the chamber is going to survive thousands of years, the builders must understand how pressure moves through the surrounding material. The Great Pyramid itself contains an extraordinary network of internal passages. The descending passage, the ascending passage, the Grand Gallery, the King's Chamber, the so-called Queen's Chamber, relieving structures above the King's Chamber, and mysterious shafts whose exact original purposes remain debated. These spaces demonstrate that the builders were not simply stacking blocks. They were designing an internal architecture while simultaneously constructing a massive external monument. And some of their solutions are surprisingly sophisticated. Above the king's chamber, for example, the builders created multiple layers of granite and structural spaces designed to reduce the pressure of the enormous weight above. Whatever the exact purpose of each layer, the structure demonstrates a clear awareness of the problem created by massive loads. Stone pushes downward. A chamber creates a weakness. So the builders needed a way to distribute the weight. This is structural engineering. And they were doing it thousands of years before modern engineering textbooks existed. But then, something even stranger happened. Modern scientists began scanning the pyramid without opening it. Instead of drilling through walls, they used particles that naturally pass through matter. Muons. These tiny particles are produced when cosmic rays interact with Earth's atmosphere. They constantly pass through us, through buildings, through mountains, and through pyramids. But different materials absorb them at different rates. By measuring the number of muons arriving from different directions, scientists can identify areas inside a structure where there is less material. Essentially, they can create a kind of X-ray image of an enormous monument. And this technique revealed previously unknown voids inside the Great Pyramid. A large hidden space above the Grand Gallery was identified through multiple independent detection methods. Researchers called it the Scan Pyramid's Big Void. We still do not know exactly what it was. It could have served a structural purpose. It could be a corridor. It could be a chamber. It could have been created during construction and never used. There is not enough evidence to say. But that uncertainty is precisely what makes the discovery so fascinating. After thousands of years, the pyramid still contains spaces that modern scientists cannot fully explain. And this is where the story of ancient technology becomes genuinely mysterious. Because imagine what the Egyptians themselves knew about those spaces. They built them. They knew where they were. They knew why they were there. Yet that knowledge disappeared. The monument survived. The information did not. This is one of the most important lessons archaeology teaches us. A civilization can preserve its buildings while losing its knowledge. A structure can survive longer than the society that created it. A technique can disappear even while its results remain visible. And once the original context is gone, future generations are left trying to reconstruct the logic. This may explain why so many ancient technologies seem mysterious today. We are seeing fragments without the complete system. A strange tool, a damaged inscription, a mechanical object, a hidden chamber, a water channel, a mathematical measurement. Each piece is fascinating, but the complete picture is missing. And sometimes, modern researchers connect these fragments in ways the evidence does not support. This is where stories about ancient electricity, mysterious energy sources, or lost super technologies become popular. One famous idea suggests that the Great Pyramid was actually a power plant. According to versions of this theory, water moving beneath the pyramid somehow generated energy, while the chambers and materials acted as components of a giant electrical system. It is an intriguing story, but there is no convincing archaeological evidence that the Great Pyramid was designed as an electrical generator. The same applies to claims that Nikola Tesla discovered the secret purpose of the pyramid. Tesla was fascinated by wireless energy, resonance, electricity, and the natural environment. But connecting his experiments directly to an ancient Egyptian power system goes far beyond the historical evidence. The truth is already extraordinary. The Egyptians did not need electricity to produce an engineering revolution. They achieved astonishing results through mechanical advantage, organization, mathematics, observation, and materials. And that is perhaps more impressive than the fantasy. Because it means humans did this. Humans with no computers. Humans with no engines. Humans with no modern cranes. Humans using tools that appear primitive to us. Yet there is still one enormous gap in our understanding. We know many of the principles they could have used. We can demonstrate that sledges work. We can demonstrate that wet sand reduces friction. We can demonstrate that ropes and pulleys provide mechanical advantage. We can demonstrate that boats can transport enormous loads. We can demonstrate that water can establish level surfaces. We can demonstrate that astronomical observations can determine direction. But demonstrating individual techniques is not the same as reconstructing the entire pyramid. We still do not possess a universally accepted step-by-step explanation for every stage. And perhaps we never will, because the evidence is incomplete. Some materials are gone. Some records are missing. Some structures have collapsed. And some ancient knowledge may have been transmitted orally and never written down. That leaves us with a fascinating paradox. We know enough to understand that the Egyptians were capable of extraordinary engineering. But we do not know enough to reconstruct every detail of how they achieved it. And somewhere between those two facts lies the true mystery of Giza. Not an alien machine, not a magical energy source, not a lost civilization from another world, but a human civilization whose knowledge was so sophisticated that thousands of years later, we are still trying to reverse engineer it. The pyramid does not speak. The stones do not explain themselves. But every quarry, every tool, every worker's settlement, every hidden chamber, and every ancient record gives us another fragment. And perhaps one day, those fragments will finally connect. Until then, the Great Pyramid remains something more than a monument. It is a technological message from the ancient world. A message written not in words, but in stone. And we are still learning how to read it. If the pyramids were simply tombs, why did their builders surround them with systems that demanded extraordinary knowledge of stone, water, geometry, astronomy, transportation, and engineering? And why do some discoveries near Giza seem to suggest that the story of ancient Egyptian technology is far more complicated than the familiar image of workers dragging stones through the desert? For thousands of years, the Great Pyramid has stood above the Giza Plateau like a monument to something we still do not completely understand. We know who commissioned it. We have evidence of organized labor, quarries, transportation networks, food supplies, and construction camps. But the deeper we look, the stranger the story becomes. Beneath the familiar surface of ancient Egypt was a civilization capable of solving enormous engineering problems with materials and tools that seem incredibly simple by modern standards. They had no steel cranes, no diesel engines, no computers, and no modern surveying equipment. Yet they managed to shape millions of blocks, transport them across enormous distances, position them with remarkable precision, and construct monuments whose proportions continue to fascinate engineers today. And perhaps the most important clue is not hidden in the pyramid itself. It may be hidden in the technologies surrounding it. One of the most overlooked technologies of ancient Egypt was water management. The Nile was the heartbeat of Egyptian civilization. Without it, the civilization we associate with pyramids, temples, and enormous stone monuments could never have existed. But controlling the Nile was not simply a matter of waiting for the annual flood. Ancient Egyptians developed sophisticated methods for moving, storing, measuring, and distributing water. They created canals and reservoirs. They developed systems for irrigation and used measuring instruments to monitor water levels. A device known as the Nilometer allowed officials to determine how high the Nile had risen during the annual flood. That measurement had enormous consequences. Too little water could mean famine. Too much could destroy settlements. But when the flood was balanced correctly, Egypt could produce enough food to support enormous construction projects. This changes the way we should imagine pyramid construction. Instead of picturing thousands of exhausted people wandering through a barren desert, Imagine an enormous logistical machine operating across the entire kingdom. Farmers produced food. Workers transported materials. Boat crews moved stone along the Nile. Craftsmen shaped blocks. Surveyors measured distances. Administrators recorded supplies. And specialized workers coordinated the entire operation. The pyramid was not simply a building. It was the visible result of an entire technological system. And one discovery offers a remarkable glimpse into how that system worked. Near the Red Sea, archaeologists discovered evidence of an ancient harbor connected to the reign of Pharaoh Khufu. Among the discoveries were fragments of papyrus documenting the activities of an official named Merer. Merer was not a king. He was not a priest. He was a supervisor involved in transporting limestone. His records describe crews moving stone from Tura toward the construction area associated with Khufu's pyramid. For the first time, we get something incredibly valuable. A glimpse into the ordinary logistics behind one of humanity's most extraordinary monuments. The documents suggest that workers were using boats and waterways to transport heavy materials. This is important because water could eliminate much of the friction involved in moving enormous stones over land. Instead of dragging every block across the desert from its quarry, workers could load materials onto boats and allow the river system to carry them. Then, when the stone reached the appropriate location, the workers could unload it and continue the journey over land using sledges, ropes, ramps, and carefully coordinated teams. It sounds simple, but simplicity can be deceptive. Moving a 1-ton block is difficult. Moving a block weighing several tons is much harder. Moving millions of them while maintaining a precise architectural design is something else entirely. The real technological achievement may therefore not have been one mysterious machine. It may have been the coordination of thousands of ordinary technologies working together. Wood, rope, stone, water, levers, sledges, ramps, geometry, astronomy, and human organization. Yet there is another ancient technology that deserves attention because it reveals just how advanced Egyptian craftsmen could be. Stone cutting. Some of the hardest materials used in ancient Egypt were not limestone but granite, especially granite quarried near Aswan. Granite is extremely hard. Modern engineers use powerful cutting tools to shape it. Ancient Egyptians did not possess modern machinery, yet they produced astonishingly precise granite objects. Some sarcophagi contain surfaces that appear remarkably smooth. Some vessels have thin walls and carefully shaped interiors, and some unfinished stones preserve the marks of the tools used to create them. This is where the mystery becomes more interesting. Archaeologists have discovered copper tools, stone tools, pounding stones, and other equipment associated with ancient Egyptian craftsmanship. Copper itself is relatively soft compared with granite, meaning it could not simply slice through hard stone like a modern steel blade. So how did the craftsmen do it? One explanation is abrasive technology. Instead of relying on the copper itself to cut the stone, workers could use abrasive materials such as quartz sand. The copper tool would hold the abrasive against the surface while repeated movement gradually removed the stone. It would have been slow, extremely slow. But slow does not mean impossible, and this distinction is crucial. Ancient technology does not need to resemble modern technology to be effective. Given enough workers, enough time, and enough organization, a civilization can accomplish extraordinary things using relatively simple tools. The same principle may explain another mysterious technology associated with ancient Egypt: the shaduf. This deceptively simple device consisted of a long wooden pole balanced around a pivot, with a container attached to one end and a counterweight on the other. One person could use it to lift water from a lower level to a higher one. It transformed human strength into mechanical advantage, and it was only one of many water technologies developed over centuries. The Egyptians understood something fundamental. A machine does not have to be complicated to be powerful. A lever can multiply force. A ramp can transform vertical lifting into horizontal movement. A counterweight can reduce effort. A boat can transform the Nile into a transportation highway. A measuring rod can transform distance into geometry. And an astronomical observation can transform the night sky into a surveying instrument. Put all of these together, and the pyramids begin to look less like impossible objects and more like the ultimate expression of a highly organized, technological civilization. But there is still one question that refuses to disappear. Why were the pyramids aligned so precisely? The Great Pyramid is remarkably aligned with the cardinal directions. Its builders had to establish north, south, east, and west with extraordinary accuracy. They did not have a magnetic compass, but they did have something else: the sky. Ancient Egyptians carefully observed celestial objects. Stars could provide fixed reference points, while the movement of the sun could help establish direction and time. This connection between astronomy and architecture was not accidental. Egyptian civilization was deeply connected to the cycles of the heavens, the rising and setting of the sun, the movement of stars, the annual flooding of the Nile, the changing seasons. Life, death, agriculture, religion, and architecture were all connected. The pyramid therefore existed at the intersection of several technologies: engineering, astronomy, mathematics, transportation, stoneworking, water management, and administration. This is why the idea of a single mysterious machine may actually distract us from the more remarkable truth. The technology may have been the civilization itself, but that does not mean every mystery has been solved. Far from it. Modern scanning technologies continue to reveal spaces inside and around ancient monuments that were previously unknown or poorly understood. Muon scanning has allowed researchers to detect differences in density inside the Great Pyramid without physically destroying the structure. Ground-penetrating radar and other remote sensing methods have revealed anomalies beneath archaeological sites. Three-dimensional mapping can expose features buried beneath layers of sand. And every new technique creates the possibility of discovering something the ancient builders never intended us to see. That is where the story becomes genuinely mysterious. Because when modern technology looks into a monument built thousands of years ago, it is not simply searching for treasure. It is searching for information. A hidden chamber could reveal architectural plans. A sealed passage could reveal religious practices. A forgotten workshop could reveal manufacturing techniques. A discarded tool could reveal how a difficult material was shaped. Even something as ordinary as a piece of rope, a wooden fragment, or a damaged stone can completely change what we understand about ancient engineering. And perhaps, somewhere beneath the sands surrounding Giza, another piece of that puzzle is still waiting. Not an alien machine, not a magical energy device, but something potentially more fascinating. Evidence showing exactly how human beings, using knowledge accumulated over generations, achieved something that still looks almost impossible thousands of years later. The real mystery of ancient Egypt may not be that they possessed technology we cannot explain. It may be that they possessed technology we have underestimated. And if that is true, then the next discovery near Giza may not rewrite history by proving that the Egyptians had futuristic machines. It could rewrite history by showing us just how sophisticated human engineering had already become 5,000 years ago. Because sometimes the most shocking discoveries are not evidence that history was wrong. They are evidence that history was far more advanced than we imagined. For thousands of years, the sands of Egypt have hidden more than tombs. Beneath the monuments, inside abandoned chambers, and scattered across forgotten settlements are clues to a civilization that understood engineering in ways that still surprise us. And now, as researchers use technologies that the ancient Egyptians could never have imagined, some of those buried clues are beginning to emerge. But there is one problem. The more we discover, the harder it becomes to separate genuine ancient technology from modern myths. That distinction matters, because the story of ancient Egypt has attracted some extraordinary claims. Some people argue that the pyramids were power plants. Others believe the Egyptians possessed advanced electrical technology thousands of years before modern civilization. Some even suggest that mysterious objects found in Egypt could be evidence of technology far beyond what historians believe was possible. But what does the evidence actually tell us? One of the most fascinating objects connected to this debate is a small wooden artifact commonly called the Saqqara bird. It was discovered in a tomb at Saqqara and dates to around the 2nd century BCE, although some claims have attempted to connect it with much earlier technology. At first glance, it looks like a simple bird. But when you examine its shape, something strange becomes apparent. It has wings, it has a vertical tail, and its proportions resemble, at least superficially, the shape of an aircraft. That resemblance has inspired an enormous amount of speculation. Could ancient Egyptians have understood aerodynamics? Was this a model of a flying machine? Or was it simply a representation of a bird? Mainstream archaeology generally treats the object as a stylized bird or possibly a model whose original function remains uncertain. And there is an important reason for caution. A shape resembling a modern machine does not automatically prove that the ancient people who created it understood the technology behind that machine. A child can draw a rocket without knowing how a rocket engine works. A wooden bird can accidentally resemble an airplane without being an airplane. But the object remains fascinating because it raises a broader question. How much did ancient people understand about forces we associate with modern science? The Egyptians clearly understood motion, balance, weight, leverage, and geometry. They built boats capable of navigating the Nile and the Mediterranean. They developed sophisticated architectural techniques. They understood practical mathematics well enough to measure land, calculate areas, and construct enormous monuments. They also developed medical procedures, surgical instruments, calendars, astronomical observations, and complex systems of writing. So perhaps the real mystery is not whether they secretly possessed modern technology. Perhaps it is how far their practical knowledge actually extended. And Egypt was not alone. Across the ancient world, civilizations were creating machines that seem almost impossible for their time. One of the most famous examples comes from the Mediterranean, the Antikythera mechanism. Unlike the pyramids, this object is not mysterious because it is enormous. It is mysterious because it is tiny. It is a mechanical device made from bronze gears, discovered inside a shipwreck near the Greek island of Antikythera. Researchers believe it dates to around the 2nd or 1st century BCE. When scientists reconstructed the surviving fragments, they discovered something extraordinary. The mechanism could model astronomical cycles. It appears to have been designed to track movements of celestial bodies and predict astronomical events. This was not a simple decoration. It was a complex mechanical calculator. Its existence forced historians to reconsider what ancient engineers were capable of. For a long time, the history of mechanical technology was imagined as a gradual progression. Simple tools, then more complicated machines, then clocks, then mechanical calculators, then modern computers. But the Antikythera mechanism disrupted that neat timeline. It showed that ancient craftsmen could create highly sophisticated gear systems long before the industrial age. And that matters when we return to Egypt, because ancient civilizations did not exist in isolation. Ideas traveled, engineers traveled, merchants traveled, mathematicians traveled, religious traditions traveled, and technologies could move across borders for centuries. Egypt had contact with Greece, the Levant, Mesopotamia, Nubia, and regions across the Mediterranean. So when we discover a sophisticated technology in one ancient civilization, we should not automatically assume it appeared from nowhere. Human knowledge spreads, sometimes slowly, sometimes unexpectedly, and sometimes it disappears. That last part may be the most important. History is full of technologies that were invented, used, forgotten, and later reinvented. Ancient Egypt itself provides examples. Consider plumbing. Today, when we turn on a faucet, clean water appears almost effortlessly. It feels completely normal. But controlling water is one of humanity's oldest technological challenges. Ancient Egyptians developed systems for moving and storing water. They used basins, channels, wells, pipes, and containers. Archaeologists have discovered evidence of drainage systems and water management infrastructure at ancient settlements. In some places, stone channels were carefully designed to direct water away from important buildings. Other ancient civilizations went even further. The Indus Valley Civilization developed sophisticated urban drainage systems. Roman engineers later built enormous aqueducts and sewer networks. The ancient world was not technologically primitive. It was technologically different. And this distinction becomes critical when examining the Great Pyramid. The pyramid itself is sometimes described as an impossible structure because it contains millions of blocks. But the most impressive part may not be the individual blocks. It is the coordination. Imagine organizing thousands of workers, feeding them, housing them, supplying tools, transporting stone, maintaining boats, managing quarries, measuring distances, recording inventories, planning work schedules, and ensuring that the monument remained aligned while construction continued upward. That requires administration on a massive scale. The ancient Egyptians had exactly that. Their civilization developed a powerful bureaucracy capable of collecting taxes, managing agricultural production, recording goods, and organizing labor. The pyramid was therefore not just a construction project. It was a national-scale operation. And perhaps that is why the discovery of ancient administrative records is just as important as the discovery of mysterious artifacts. A piece of papyrus can tell us who worked. A quarry mark can tell us where stone came from. A settlement can reveal what workers ate. A boat can reveal how materials traveled. A tool can reveal how stone was shaped. Together, these ordinary pieces create something extraordinary, a technological system. But there is another object that has often been pulled into the mystery of ancient Egyptian engineering: the so-called Baghdad Battery. Although it was not found in Egypt, it is frequently mentioned whenever ancient electricity is discussed. The artifact consists of a ceramic vessel with a metal cylinder and rod. Some experiments have shown that a similar arrangement can produce a small electrical potential when filled with an acidic liquid. That sounds spectacular. An ancient battery. Electricity thousands of years before Benjamin Franklin or Thomas Edison. But there is a major problem. We do not have conclusive evidence that the object was actually used as a battery. Its exact purpose remains debated. And that is the pattern we keep seeing. An artifact can be real. Its technology can be interesting. Its purpose can be uncertain. Then speculation fills the gap. This is how archaeological mysteries grow. A strange object becomes a theory. The theory becomes a story. The story becomes a claim. And eventually, people forget which parts were actually proven. The pyramids have suffered from this process for generations. One popular theory claims that the Great Pyramid was a giant electrical power station. Supporters point toward granite chambers, limestone passages, water, and the pyramid's unusual geometry. They suggest these elements could somehow have generated or concentrated energy. But there is currently no accepted archaeological evidence demonstrating that the Great Pyramid functioned as an electrical generator. That does not make the pyramid less impressive. If anything, the real evidence is more fascinating. The Egyptians achieved extraordinary results using technologies we can actually investigate. They could quarry stone. They could transport it. They could shape it. They could measure it. They could move it. And they could assemble it into structures of astonishing scale. No supernatural explanation is required. But the absence of a supernatural explanation does not mean there is no mystery. There are still unanswered questions. Exactly which ramp systems were used? How were the largest stones positioned? How were certain granite surfaces finished? How were surveying techniques performed with such accuracy? How did different teams coordinate across such enormous projects? And what technologies have disappeared because their materials were organic and simply did not survive? Wood rots. Rope decays. Leather disappears. Plant fibers vanish. Metal can be recycled. Only stone survives for thousands of years with any reliability. That means archaeology may be giving us an incomplete picture. Imagine trying to reconstruct modern civilization if all plastic, electronics, paper, steel, concrete, and wood disappeared. You might discover a few stone foundations and wonder how our society functioned. That may be exactly what we are doing with ancient Egypt. We are reconstructing an entire technological civilization from fragments. And sometimes, those fragments are hiding in places we never expected. Under the desert, inside tombs, at the bottom of the Nile, behind sealed walls, or beneath monuments that have already been studied for generations. Modern scanning technology is changing that. Instead of destroying ancient structures to see what lies inside, researchers can now use non-invasive methods. Muons can reveal differences in density. Ground-penetrating radar can detect buried structures. Magnetometry can identify disturbances beneath the surface. Three-dimensional scanning can expose details invisible to the human eye. Every technology we develop gives us another way to interrogate the ancient world. And the irony is almost perfect. Thousands of years ago, Egyptian engineers used their technology to hide, protect, and preserve their monuments. Today, our technology is being used to look inside them. The ancient builders may have believed they were creating monuments for eternity. They could not have imagined that thousands of years later, scientists would be sending invisible particles through their stones to discover what was hidden inside. And that is where the mystery of the 5,000-year-old technology becomes even more compelling. The greatest secret may not be a machine. It may be knowledge. Knowledge about materials. Knowledge about water. Knowledge about astronomy. Knowledge about geometry. Knowledge about human organization. Knowledge accumulated over generations and then transformed into stone. The pyramids are not proof that ancient Egyptians possessed futuristic technology. They are proof that ancient humans were capable of extraordinary technological achievement. And somewhere beneath the sands of Giza, there may still be one missing piece. One tool, one workshop, one inscription, one forgotten chamber. Something small enough to have been overlooked, yet important enough to explain a question that has survived for thousands of years. Because sometimes history does not change when we discover a giant monument. It changes when we discover the tiny object that tells us how it was made. And if that object is still buried beneath Egypt's ancient sands, then the greatest chapter of the pyramid mystery may not have been written yet. For more than 4,000 years, the Great Pyramid has watched the world change around it. Kingdoms have risen and disappeared. Languages have been forgotten. Empires have crossed the Nile. Cities have been buried beneath the sand. And technologies that once seemed revolutionary have vanished completely. Yet the pyramid remains, silent, massive, and strangely precise. But perhaps the greatest mystery is not what the pyramid looks like from the outside. It is what the ancient Egyptians understood that allowed them to build it. Because when we look closely at ancient Egyptian technology, we begin to see something unexpected. They were not simply builders. They were engineers, mathematicians, astronomers, architects, doctors, craftsmen, farmers, sailors, and administrators. Their technology was everywhere. In the fields, in the workshops, in the temples, in the boats, in the tombs, and perhaps most importantly, in the systems that connected all of them together. One of the most revealing examples is something that seems almost too ordinary to be mysterious. The ancient Egyptian door. A door sounds simple, but a massive stone door weighing hundreds of kilograms requires careful engineering. It needs to rotate smoothly. It needs a stable pivot. It needs to support its own weight. And it needs to fit accurately enough to protect what lies beyond it. Archaeologists have found evidence of sophisticated pivot systems in ancient Egyptian architecture. Stone doors could rotate around carefully prepared sockets. The concept is remarkably simple, but simple mechanisms can produce extraordinary results when designed correctly. The same principle appears throughout Egyptian engineering. The lever, the pulley-like systems, the inclined plane, the counterweight, the sledge, the boat. None of these inventions required electricity. None required computers. But combined together, they could accomplish enormous tasks. This is one reason the idea of ancient Egyptian technology being primitive can be misleading. Primitive is not the same thing as simple. A technology can use simple materials and still require sophisticated knowledge. Think about a sailing ship. A wooden boat does not look technologically advanced compared with a modern aircraft. But building a vessel capable of surviving storms, carrying heavy cargo, and navigating long distances requires an enormous amount of knowledge. Ancient Egyptians understood boats extremely well. The discovery of the Khufu ship provides an extraordinary example. Near the Great Pyramid, archaeologists found a massive disassembled wooden vessel. Its components had been carefully arranged and preserved. When reconstructed, the vessel revealed an enormous ancient ship. It was not a small fishing boat. It was a sophisticated vessel built from carefully shaped wooden components. The ship was designed using techniques that allowed its pieces to work together as a flexible structure. And the most remarkable part is that the vessel was constructed without modern metal fasteners. Ancient craftsmen had to understand wood, tension, compression, balance, and assembly. This matters because the Nile was essential to pyramid construction. The river was not simply a source of water. It was an ancient transportation network. During periods when the Nile reached higher levels, boats could move heavy materials closer to construction zones. The river connected quarries, settlements, farms, ports, and temples. In other words, the Egyptians had something that every major technological civilization needs: infrastructure. A civilization capable of building enormous monuments must first build the systems that make those monuments possible. Food must arrive. Materials must arrive. Workers must be organized. Tools must be produced. Information must travel. And all of it must be recorded. That brings us to one of the most fascinating technologies of ancient Egypt: writing. Hieroglyphs are often treated as decoration, but they were far more than decoration. Writing was an administrative technology. It allowed officials to record quantities, names, taxes, deliveries, religious ceremonies, workers, and property. A civilization cannot easily coordinate a massive project without information. The pyramid builders needed information. How many stones arrived? From which quarry? Which team was responsible? How much food was distributed? Which workers were present? Which materials were missing? The ability to record information transformed human organization. And perhaps this is one of the most important technologies behind the pyramid. Not a machine. Information. The Egyptians also developed systems of measurement. They used standardized units for length, area, and volume. One important unit was the royal cubit. It allowed builders to reproduce measurements across enormous construction projects. Without standardized measurement, precision architecture becomes almost impossible. Imagine trying to build a structure several hundred feet high while every worker uses a slightly different measurement. Small errors would accumulate. Walls would drift. Angles would change. The structure could become unstable. But standardized measurement allowed teams to work together. The pyramid could rise layer by layer while maintaining its overall geometry. And geometry was not simply useful, it was fundamental. The Egyptians understood right angles, proportions, areas, and practical calculations. They used mathematical knowledge for land surveying after the Nile floodwaters changed the boundaries of fields. They used it for construction. They used it for taxation. They used it for architecture. The famous Rhind mathematical papyrus preserves examples of Egyptian mathematical problems. It shows a civilization capable of solving practical problems involving fractions, areas, volumes, and proportions. This helps explain why the pyramids could be constructed with such consistency. The builders did not need modern algebra textbooks. They needed practical mathematics. And they had it. But now we arrive at one of the most mysterious questions. What about electricity? Could the ancient Egyptians have used it? The idea has become incredibly popular. Some researchers and enthusiasts point toward strange reliefs, underground chambers, and artifacts as possible evidence of electrical technology. One famous example comes from the Dendera temple complex. There, a relief appears to show a large object resembling a modern light bulb. Inside it is a snake-like form. Beneath it is a structure that some interpret as a cable or electrical device. At first glance, the resemblance is astonishing. Could the Egyptians have been using electric lamps? Could they have illuminated deep tombs without leaving soot? Could this explain the clean ceilings inside some underground chambers? The idea sounds compelling. But appearance is not evidence. Egyptologists generally interpret the Dendera relief through Egyptian religious symbolism rather than modern electrical technology. The object is associated with mythology involving creation, fertility, and divine power. The snake-like figure has symbolic meaning within Egyptian religion. There is no archaeological record demonstrating that the Egyptians possessed electrical generators, conductive wiring systems, or electrical lighting technology comparable to modern devices. And that distinction is crucial. A mysterious image can inspire a question, but a question is not proof. The same applies to the famous claim that the pyramids were giant power plants. There are fascinating properties of the Great Pyramid that scientists can study. Its geometry interacts with electromagnetic radiation in ways that have been modeled mathematically under certain conditions. Researchers have examined how radio frequency electromagnetic waves interact with the pyramid's shape. But this does not mean the ancient Egyptians intentionally designed the pyramid as an electromagnetic energy generator. A physical effect can exist without being the original purpose of a structure. This is one of the most important lessons when studying ancient mysteries. We must separate what something can do from what its builders intended it to do. A stone chamber can resonate. A structure can interact with electromagnetic waves. A material can have interesting physical properties. But none of those facts automatically reveal why the ancient builders constructed it. And yet, there is another possibility that is much more fascinating. Maybe the ancient Egyptians did not need electricity because they had already mastered the technologies that mattered most to their world. Water, gravity, heat, wind, the sun, the river, human labor, mechanical advantage, and astronomy. They learned how to use natural forces instead of trying to overpower them. The Nile moved cargo. The wind moved ships. Gravity helped transport materials downhill. Ramps transformed vertical lifting into gradual movement. Levers multiplied human strength. Counterweights reduced effort. The sun provided light and helped regulate time. The stars provided reference points for orientation. This was ancient engineering. Not futuristic, not supernatural, but extraordinarily intelligent. And then there are technologies that have almost completely disappeared. For example, the Egyptians used adhesives and binding materials in woodworking and construction. They developed methods for preserving organic materials. They created pigments and cosmetics. They worked with glass and faience. They manufactured ropes and textiles. They developed specialized metalworking techniques. Many of these technologies would have required recipes and practical knowledge passed from master to apprentice. But recipes disappear. Workshops collapse. Craft traditions die. And when the last specialist dies without passing the knowledge on, an entire technology can disappear. That may have happened countless times throughout Egyptian history. Imagine an ancient craftsman discovering the perfect method for cutting a particular stone. He teaches 2 apprentices. One apprentice dies. The other moves to another city. His workshop eventually disappears. 1,000 years later, archaeologists discover the finished objects but not the process. They see the result. They don't see the knowledge. This is perhaps why archaeology can sometimes feel like solving a crime scene where most of the evidence has been destroyed. We have the monument. We have fragments. We have tools. We have inscriptions. But the instruction manual is missing. And sometimes the missing manual is the entire mystery. That is why discoveries around Giza matter so much. Every quarry, worker settlement, tool mark, boat fragment, and piece of papyrus can add another line to that missing instruction manual. The story becomes clearer, but it also becomes more complicated, because every answer creates another question. If workers used ramps, what did the complete ramp system look like? If boats transported the stones, where exactly did they unload them? If surveyors aligned the pyramid using stars, which stars did they use? If copper tools were used to work hard stone, what abrasive techniques were involved? If thousands of workers participated, how was the workforce divided? If the pyramid was built over decades, how did the project adapt when leadership changed? These are not questions that require aliens. They require archaeology, and archaeology is slowly answering them. But the most exciting discoveries may still be ahead, because modern researchers are no longer limited to digging. They can scan, they can map, they can model, they can analyze microscopic tool marks, they can study ancient DNA, they can examine residues preserved inside vessels, they can reconstruct ancient landscapes, they can even detect hidden structures without opening them. The desert is no longer simply a place where archaeologists search for objects. It has become a technological archive. Every layer of sand may preserve information. Every buried settlement may reveal another piece of the ancient machine that powered Egyptian civilization. And perhaps that is the real meaning behind the mysterious technology found near Giza. The technology itself may not be a single spectacular invention. It may be the accumulated knowledge of generations, knowledge that transformed stone into architecture, water into agriculture, wood into ships, copper into tools, stars into measurements, and human labor into monuments that survived thousands of years. The Great Pyramid does not need to have been a power plant to be extraordinary. It does not need alien builders to be astonishing. It does not need a forgotten futuristic machine to rewrite our understanding of history, because the evidence already tells us something remarkable. 5,000 years ago, human beings were capable of organizing resources, manipulating materials, calculating measurements, controlling water, navigating rivers, studying the heavens, and constructing one of the largest monuments on Earth. And perhaps the greatest mystery is not how they could have done it. It is how much more they knew that we have not discovered yet. The sands of Egypt have preserved the stones, but they may have buried the knowledge. And somewhere beneath those ancient layers, there could still be a workshop, a tool, a fragment of papyrus, or an unknown structure waiting to reveal another piece of the technology that built the ancient world. Because the pyramid has already survived 4,500 years. The question is whether our technology is finally advanced enough to understand the technology that created it. Imagine standing at the base of the Great Pyramid just before sunrise. The desert is silent. The stones rise above you like an artificial mountain, each layer disappearing into the darkness above. For more than 4,000 years, generations have stood in almost exactly the same place and asked the same question. How did human beings build this? Not how could they have done it with modern machines. How did they do it with the tools they actually had? Because the deeper we investigate ancient Egypt, the clearer one thing becomes. The mystery is not that the Egyptians possessed technology that should not have existed. The mystery is that the technology they did possess was far more sophisticated than we once imagined. And perhaps the most important discovery near Giza is not a strange machine, a mysterious crystal, or an impossible artifact. It is the growing evidence of an entire technological civilization working together. A civilization that understood how to move enormous stones, how to control water, how to measure land, how to navigate rivers, how to preserve food and human bodies, how to manufacture tools, how to organize thousands of workers, and how to transform mathematical ideas into architecture that has survived thousands of years. But there is still a question hanging over the Great Pyramid. What if we have been looking at the wrong thing? What if the pyramid itself is only the final product? What if the real technology was everything that existed around it? The quarries, the boats, the roads, the workers' settlements, the storage facilities, the ramps, the workshops, the administrative records, the water systems, and the knowledge passed from one generation to another. This changes the entire mystery. Because building a pyramid was not one problem. It was thousands of problems happening at the same time. A stone had to be selected, then extracted, then shaped, then transported, then delivered, then lifted, then positioned. And all of that had to happen while thousands of other stones were moving through the same system. One mistake could create a chain reaction. A damaged stone could delay a team. A broken rope could stop transportation. A shortage of food could reduce the workforce. A flood could change the transportation schedule. A poorly positioned block could affect everything above it. The fact that the project continued for years suggests that the Egyptians had systems capable of dealing with these problems. And this is where the ancient records become so valuable. The papyri associated with the pyramid-building era provide glimpses into the administrative world behind the monument. They show that workers were not simply an anonymous mass. They were organized into teams. They had supervisors. They received food and supplies. Materials were transported across the landscape. Officials recorded deliveries and movements. This is not the image of a civilization blindly stacking stones. It is the image of a civilization managing a massive engineering project. And there is another clue hiding in plain sight: the workers themselves. For decades, popular culture presented the pyramids as monuments built by endless armies of slaves. But archaeological evidence paints a more complicated picture. Near Giza, researchers discovered settlements associated with the workers. There were bakeries. There were areas for food preparation. There were workshops. There were storage facilities. There were places where workers lived and recovered. The remains of animals indicate that large quantities of meat and other food were supplied to the workforce. This tells us something important. The pyramid builders needed calories. A huge construction project requires energy. Human muscles were the engines of the ancient world. And feeding those engines was itself an enormous technological and logistical challenge. Think about the scale. Thousands of workers, day after day, month after month, year after year. Someone had to grow the grain. Someone had to harvest it. Someone had to transport it. Someone had to turn it into bread. Someone had to distribute it. Someone had to provide water. Someone had to maintain tools. Someone had to repair boats. Someone had to quarry stone. The pyramid was therefore supported by an invisible network of people who never appear in the monument itself. Farmers, bakers, boatmen, carpenters, rope makers, stonecutters, surveyors, administrators, doctors, metal workers, and thousands of laborers. The monument was the tip of the iceberg. And this is why the phrase ancient technology can be misleading. Technology is not just a machine. Technology is knowledge applied to solve a problem. A farmer changing irrigation channels is using technology. A worker calculating the angle of a ramp is using technology. A carpenter designing a joint is using technology. A sailor navigating by stars is using technology. An administrator calculating food supplies is using technology. When all these systems work together, they create something much larger than any individual invention: a civilization. And Egypt's civilization was extraordinarily durable. But the Great Pyramid still contains mysteries. One of the most intriguing is its internal architecture. Most of the pyramid is solid stone. There are relatively few open spaces compared with its enormous size. Yet those spaces are highly significant. The descending passage, the ascending passage, the grand gallery, the king's chamber, the so-called queen's chamber, the subterranean chamber, and several narrow shafts and passages. For centuries, explorers have entered these spaces searching for treasure, inscriptions, and answers. Some passages were known in antiquity. Others were rediscovered. And in recent decades, modern scanning technologies have revealed something even more exciting: hidden spaces. Muon tomography has allowed researchers to detect regions inside the Great Pyramid where the density differs from the surrounding stone. This technique does not require drilling through the monument. Instead, it uses naturally occurring cosmic ray particles called muons. These particles pass through matter. Dense stone absorbs more of them. Less dense spaces allow more to pass through. By measuring the pattern, scientists can create a kind of shadow image of the interior. It is almost like taking an X-ray of a mountain, and the results revealed previously unknown voids. One of them is known as the Scan Pyramid's Big Void. Its exact function remains uncertain. Was it a corridor? A structural space? A construction feature? A hidden chamber? We still do not know. And that uncertainty is important, because the discovery does not prove a hidden treasure room. It proves something more fundamental. The pyramid still contains information we have not accessed. Thousands of years after its construction, we are still discovering new spaces inside it. And that should make us wonder what else could be hidden beneath the Giza Plateau. The plateau itself is not simply a collection of 3 pyramids. It is an enormous archaeological landscape. There are temples, causeways, tombs, pits, settlements, quarries, and underground features. Some remain poorly understood. Others are still being investigated. Modern geophysical surveys have begun revealing structures without disturbing the ground. That means future discoveries may happen without traditional excavation. Instead of digging blindly, researchers can first create detailed maps beneath the surface. Then they can identify areas that deserve closer examination. The technology of the 21st century is allowing us to investigate the technology of the 3rd millennium BCE. There is something almost poetic about that. The ancient Egyptians built enormous monuments using the knowledge available to them. Thousands of years later, we are using entirely different forms of knowledge to understand what they built. But perhaps the greatest lesson is about how history actually works. History is not a finished story. It is an investigation. New evidence can change old assumptions. A papyrus can challenge a theory. A tool can change our understanding of construction. A settlement can rewrite our ideas about workers. A scan can reveal an unknown chamber. A microscopic residue can reveal what was stored inside a vessel. And sometimes a discovery that seems insignificant can completely transform the bigger picture. That is why claims about mysterious ancient technology should be approached carefully. There are genuine mysteries everywhere. We do not need to invent evidence to make ancient Egypt fascinating. The real evidence is already astonishing. Ancient Egyptians developed advanced methods of stoneworking. They created large-scale transportation networks. They engineered irrigation systems. They developed medical knowledge. They created complex calendars. They used mathematics in architecture and land measurement. They built ships capable of transporting enormous materials. They developed sophisticated systems for preserving bodies and food. And they maintained a bureaucracy capable of coordinating monumental construction. All of this happened thousands of years before modern machines. But there is one final question. Could there have been technologies that disappeared completely? Absolutely. History is full of lost knowledge. Sometimes the materials survive, but the method disappears. Sometimes the method survives, but the materials disappear. And sometimes both are lost. A wooden machine may decay. A rope system may leave no trace. A construction technique may be passed orally for generations and then vanish. A workshop may be destroyed. A specialized craft may disappear when the final master dies. This means that what we see in the archaeological record is only a fraction of what ancient people actually knew. The pyramids may therefore represent the surviving evidence of a much larger technological world. A world that existed around the monuments, but has mostly vanished. And perhaps that is the true mystery of the 5,000-year-old Egyptian technology. Not that it was impossible, but that we are still discovering how possible it actually was. The Great Pyramid does not need an unknown energy source to be extraordinary. It does not need extraterrestrial builders. It does not need futuristic machines. The human achievement is already enough. Thousands of people working together. Generation after generation of accumulated knowledge. Mathematics converted into stone. Astronomy converted into orientation. Mechanical principles converted into transportation. Water converted into agriculture. Agriculture converted into surplus. Surplus converted into labor. And labor converted into one of the greatest monuments ever created. That is the technology. A civilization capable of turning the resources of an entire kingdom into architecture that could survive for millennia. But the investigation is not over. Far beneath the sands, there may still be workshops waiting to be uncovered. There may be tools whose purpose we do not yet understand. There may be inscriptions describing techniques we have never seen. There may be buried settlements showing how the workforce was organized. There may even be unknown structures beneath the Giza Plateau that will force historians to rethink another part of the story. And perhaps one day, archaeologists will uncover the missing piece. Not a machine from the future. Something much smaller. A simple tool. A forgotten blueprint. A fragment of writing. A piece of evidence that connects the scattered clues. And when that happens, we may finally understand how the ancient Egyptians transformed stone, water, mathematics, astronomy, and human labor into monuments that still dominate the imagination of the modern world. Until then, the pyramids remain exactly what they have always been. Not merely tombs, not merely monuments, but enormous technological records written in stone. Records whose language we are still learning to read. And maybe the most astonishing discovery has not yet been made. Because beneath the sands of Egypt, the ancient world is still waiting. And every time we uncover another piece, we are reminded of one uncomfortable truth. The farther we travel into the past, the more we realize that ancient humans were not as primitive as we once imagined. They were problem solvers. They were experimenters. They were engineers. And they were capable of building something that could outlive almost everything else they created. The Great Pyramid has survived kings, wars, earthquakes, empires, and entire civilizations. Now it is surviving something else: our questions. And perhaps, after 4,500 years, that is the greatest mystery of all. How much did the ancient Egyptians know? And how much of that knowledge is still buried beneath the stones?